Hey guys, today I want to share the story of my journey in game development. And I think you guys are going to find this interesting because pretty much like the whole 10 or so years I've wanted to make a game, it has always been a mother-styled game I've wanted to make. Now, this all started a really long time ago, so I might not have the timeline perfectly in order in my head, but basically, it all started with me playing EarthBound and Mother 3 when I was a teenager, and really liking those. After I had finished those games, I heard about a game that had recently come out called Undertale. You guys might have heard of it. I largely was intrigued by this game because I heard the creator of it was a big fan of and took a lot of influence from the Mother series. Anyway, after playing Undertale, this was really what cemented in my mind the idea that I could make a game if I wanted to. Undertale was largely developed by one guy, and everybody loved it, and it was such a great game that I figured if one guy, almost entirely on his own, could make a whole game, that I could do it too. So around this time, me and a lot of my friends were pretty big into the Pokemon series. And I had seen a lot of stuff about Pokemon fan games, so I decided to investigate. I found one called Pokemon Insurgents, which at the time I thought was pretty cool, and I had found they had used a tool called Pokemon Essentials to make. So I had decided that I was going to make a Pokemon fan game. Over the course of most of 2016, I kind of fiddled around with Pokemon Essentials and kind of came to the realization that I didn't want to make a Pokemon game. I didn't want grid-based movement in 4 directions and monster catching. I was really coming back to the idea of EarthBound, where characters could run around diagonally and not be confined to a grid. And over the course of the game, you would fight with 4 human characters with special powers, rather than fighting with monsters you catch. I still liked the Pokemon games, but I really wanted to make something like a mother game. So near the end of 2016, Pokemon Sun and Moon came out, and I had kind of come to be a bit of a nerd when it came to like some background stories in the Pokemon world, and sometime in 2017, I came up with what I thought was a genius idea at the time. I was going to make a fan game like never before, because it was going to be both a Pokemon and an Earthbound fan game. What I wanted to do was take the world of Pokemon and use characters and plots from some of the recent Pokemon games and put them in a game with the mechanics of a mother game. There was going to be like this whole crazy story that tied together details and events of Pokemon games that were never really fully explained or elaborated on. And I even had this whole idea about how some characters from the Pokemon world could be able to use powers from the Mother series, kind of like the PSI attacks. And there was this whole plot I had in mind that was split up into chapters and involved time travel and multiple possible endings, and I really, truly thought it was like $1 million idea at the time. I knew this all couldn't be done in Pokemon Essentials, so I looked into GameMaker, which I knew was what Toby Fox had used to make Undertale. But at the end of the day, I was just a kid who had no real experience with programming or art or music or really any skills necessary to make a game. That didn't stop me from trying though. Like, I had taken an introductory programming class in high school, so I could kind of figure out how the GameMaker language worked. I had kind of made a couple of character sprites that were styled like the Generation 5 Pokemon sprites. And then I even figured out how to get characters to move in the overworld. And really, at the time, this was just such a huge leap for me. Like, I had made a character in a game move on the screen. I even figured out, like, a ticking health meter thing, like in the Mother games. Now, I didn't really get much further than this. I had no idea how games were really made, so I didn't know what to do from here. And I had some pretty time-consuming life commitments, like I had a couple of AP classes in high school, I was in Boy Scouts, I was on a robotics team that pretty much was like a whole part-time job after school. And this was my last year of school before college, so I kind of hit a point where I figured I was in over my head, and I was never really gonna make a game, and this was just kind of a hobby I had entertained myself with, but nothing really more than that. In 2018, I graduated high school and went off to college for mechanical engineering. Now, in the first year of engineering-focused courses, part of the curriculum actually was learning programming, and this was something I quite enjoyed. As a matter of fact, I had such a knack for it that in my second year, I actually signed up to be a teaching assistant for the engineering courses that taught programming. But after this course, where I moved more towards specialized mechanical engineering practices, I was starting to lose interest in my field of study. And then once I hit my third year, I kind of realized that I wasn't really interested in being a mechanical engineer. This honestly hit me pretty hard. Already, my education was being impacted by being in the thick of the pandemic, but I was honestly very scared with this realization that I had no passion for what I was studying for in school, but I could never really work up the courage to do something about it. I didn't want to tell my parents, especially my dad, who was so excited for me to get into this field. And I didn't want to tell my close friends, who I had been in this with for so long. I was honestly too scared to do what I think would have been the right move and change my field of study. I ended up just trudging through my education with really this gnawing feeling that I was on a course toward letting everybody down, including myself. One of my escapes during this time was getting back into EarthBound, which I had loved so much growing up. I had actually seen a video or two on YouTube, kind of going through the game and seeing if it was possible to do using only Ness. And this actually kind of put the idea in my head for maybe going through the game with every character except Ness. See, I always thought it was pretty cool how in the game they had programmed these edge cases for if Ness wasn't alive in your party and instead you were leading with a different character. Like, some NPCs would have different dialogue in very specific scenarios where Ness wasn't alive, and I thought that was pretty cool. Anyway, this really got me thinking to myself, what would the whole story of the game look like if Ness had been absent from the very start and Buzz never found him? I ended up looking into EarthBound ROM hacking, and I decided that I would make this idea come to life by developing a hack. I ended up downloading Coilsnake, which is the tool that's used to build EarthBound ROM hacks, and completely poring over the documentation for the language that's used to develop ROM hacks for EarthBound, CC script, and even rewriting story and dialogue to reflect Ness never showing up. The whole thing ended up turning into a story of Buzz arriving on Earth, expecting to find Ness, but Ness is nowhere to be found. So he pleads with the one person he can find, Picky, to try and unite the remaining 3 heroes of the prophecy, which leads to you playing the game as Picky up until the point where you would find Paula, and then running into a second scripted encounter with Starman Jr., leaving Picky completely out of commission so that control is seamlessly handed over to Paula, at which point you play through the rest of the game with the final party just being Paula, Jeff, and Pooh, with the events of the entire game needing to be changed to accommodate the different party lineup. And with the limitations of CC script, I actually ended up having to get pretty creative coming up with solutions to problems that I ran into. And overall, when I finished this hack, the whole project had ended up being a really good learning experience. Since then, I've even created a couple more EarthBound ROM hacks. I made one that made the game into a Nuzlocke challenge where if a party member dies, they're permanently dead. And at that point, the whole story would have to dynamically change at any possible point, depending on any possible number of characters that are dead. So naturally, this one ended up being even bigger than the one that I just made, to where I ran into even more problems that I had to find pretty creative solutions for. Unfortunately, this project doesn't exist anymore. I had actually completely finished it up until the final boss, but I was playing through it to bug test, and I actually came across an issue where the game would crash if a specific enemy used a specific attack on you. And I had no idea what was causing this bug. It really could have been anything, and I didn't want to go over all of the code that I had written just to try and find the source of this one bug. So I kind of gave up on this project, and all of the project's files at this point, unfortunately, are long gone. I did, however, end up making another challenge-based EarthBound ROM hack where you could play through the entire game solo with any of the characters. And this project actually still exists today. You can find it on my YouTube channel. Anyway, throughout my time of EarthBound ROM hacking, while I had appreciated the learning experiences of working within the constraints of CC script, I wanted to make something where I would have more freedom. So I decided to get back into trying to use GameMaker. The first thing I really tried to make was a full-on rolling health meter in the style of EarthBound. And actually, if you look on my channel and scroll through my past videos, you'll see that I had figured out how to accomplish this and have a video where I show it off and share the code to it. Now, to be honest, even after all of my experience coding in college and coding EarthBound ROM hacks, I still had a lot to learn, and the system that I had made those many years ago when I made that rolling health system wasn't the best way to do it probably, and I figured out a better way to do it, which is actually implemented right now in the game that I'm working on. But I'm kind of getting ahead of myself. Anyway, I ended up finishing my degree and graduating from college, and actually, out of college, I landed a job in the field of mechanical engineering. But as you might guess at this point, my heart really wasn't in it, and I just could not do this job. I ended up leaving, and sometime after I left, I ended up finding an online college course in Python programming. And I kid you not, I put all the free time I had into working on this course. I was genuinely very interested in it. This first course was actually followed up with an advanced course through the same program, and at the end of the second course, there's a whole unit on using Pygame, so I even got to have kind of a full circle moment going back to making a game, using all of the programming skills I had learned. Now, don't get me wrong, this isn't a fully fledged, I'm putting this on the Steam Marketplace, this is the next big thing game, but it genuinely was a project that I could put a good amount of time and effort into and be satisfied with the finished product. Honestly, in my recent years of making EarthBound ROM hacks and studying making games, I have found that one of the best things you can do for yourself is make projects that you can finish, and finish those projects, because just the feeling of satisfaction you get from committing to and finishing a project you start on is just so rewarding. The experience you get from finishing such a project will carry over into your next project, and the next thing that comes out will almost always be better than what came before. This whole story culminates in late last year, around September, where I finally felt confident enough to share my skills with a team that is making a game just like a game I wanted to make so many years ago. So if you stayed with me this whole time, or if you happen to skip right to this point, there's one thing I want you to take away from this. If you have a passion to learn or create something, and if you have the perseverance to genuinely stick with it, I truly think it'll work out for you. This is extremely personal, but there have been so many days in my life where I've felt like I've been heading nowhere. But Throughout the many years, I've just kept chugging along. A few different times, I have done the greatest favor I could possibly do for myself, which has always been to just delve into creating what I want to create.